Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I wanted to talk to you about really important stuff today, especially when it comes to the potential negotiations to reach an agreement and a prisoner swap between Israel and the Palestinian movements in Gaza. But before I get into that, we've just had important reports about the most intensive rocket strikes since the 7th of October that the Palestinian resistance movements launched on Israel. So we're talking about over 30 rockets on the areas of Tel Aviv and northern of Tel Aviv. And this is a very strong message from the Palestinian resistance movements that they're still in full power, they're still in control, and even launching rockets from next to Israeli soldiers. There have been a couple of images that were actually published by the Israeli soldiers in Gaza of rockets launching from next to them in Gaza onto the Israeli cities in very sensitive and highly populated areas. So this is signaling that the Palestinian resistance is still in full force. We're getting daily updates about how hard they're hitting Israel in Gaza and many Israeli casualties in Gaza. The main subject I wanted to talk about today is the talks about a potential ceasefire and a prisoner swap between Hamas and the Palestinian resistance movements and Israel. So yesterday I spoke about Ismail Haniyeh, the political bureau leader of Hamas, going to Egypt and meeting with the Egyptian intelligence to reach a potential ceasefire between Hamas and the Israelis. After that, one of the Hamas leaders had an interview with Al Jazeera. His name is Mohammed Nazzal, and he described some more details about the potential talks to reach a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians. The main highlights in what he said revolved around the fact that Israel is the one who is begging for a ceasefire, but it wants them to be on its conditions. So ever since the temporary ceasefire ended just over a month ago, Hamas were very clear and firm that they will not talk about another ceasefire unless it's a permanent ceasefire, and that there won't be any negotiations about a prisoner swap until they reach a full ceasefire and Israel stops attacking Gaza. Now, we had more statements from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, one of their leaders. He even added more conditions that Hamas did not mention, and they're the second largest resistance movement in Gaza, and I will talk about that very shortly as well. So Mohammed Nazzal said Israel is begging the Qataris and Egyptians to try and reach a ceasefire between them and Hamas. And he also mentioned that we're not the ones who went to Oslo and Warsaw. The Israelis were the ones who went there because their position is clear. It's just that Israel doesn't want to back down on the fact that they still want to attack Gaza, but they also want to reach a hostage deal between them and Hamas because of growing tensions inside the Israeli society, inside the Israeli war cabinet, and in Israel in general. He reiterated that they will only negotiate for an overall ceasefire because we won't go to negotiations when our people are suffering and the Zionists are using their bullets and airstrikes to murder babies and elderly and target hospitals, mosques and churches and civilian buildings. He also said that they need to let all aid in and that the ball is in Israel's court. He said that the Hamas and Palestinian resistance movements, they're not only defending Palestine. According to him, they're defending the Arab and Muslim nations, and that the Christian and Muslim sacred places, they don't belong only to Palestinians but to the Arab and Muslim nations. He also added that they are representing the front line, and he reiterated again that they're asking the Arab nations to stand with the Palestinians. Some of the other highlights that he mentioned are that the accomplishments of the resistance is unprecedented, and even the Zionist media is admitting it. And he added that if Hamas would have given up their weapons, that Israel would have eradicated them already because they want to do that, and Israel didn't keep it a secret. The fact that they want to eliminate the Palestinians, commit an ethnic cleansing campaign, and remove all of the Palestinians from Gaza and even build settlements again in Gaza. Another important interview took place with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Deputy Secretary General. His name is MahmoodOD. He reiterated what Hamas said, which, by the way, is very straight amongst all Hamas leaders. All of them said the same thing. No negotiations under fire. There must be talks about a permanent ceasefire before we get into any negotiations. So they're not talking. And I spoke a couple of times about how the fact that they are putting these conditions is showing that they are in a position of strength and not in weakness. The only weakness being shown here is from the Israeli side, who's being obliterated in Gaza, begging for a ceasefire, and has a complete split in the war cabinet, politically and in its society as well. MahmoodOD, the Deputy Secretary General of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, he also reiterated they won't negotiate under fire, but he added that Israel needs to withdraw from Gaza, they need to end the siege, and they need to talk about rebuilding Gaza as well. He said that the Secretary General will be visiting Egypt on Saturday and that they will discuss alongside Hamas together the details of the ceasefire, what the Palestinian side wants, and how will it be possible to reach an all-out solution. So clearly we have a big problem here when it comes to the Israeli position. Clearly the Israeli side, they want to continue the bombardment. They want to continue targeting hospitals, mosques, churches, and every life aspect in Gaza. And they expect the Palestinians to come and sit down with them. And the Palestinian resistance movements, they're not backing down. They're showing a really brave position of strength. They're not backing down, similar to what they did before the temporary ceasefire took place. They showed Israel that the language of force doesn't work with us. If you want force, you're welcome, come and taste it. But if you want to negotiate, we told you from day one that this attack on the 7th of October was primarily to reach an agreement to get our prisoners out of the Israeli prisons. Prisoners who have been dying because of torture, abuse, starvation, and many of them are under administrative detention, where Israel does not give any details about their imprisonment to their families. They don't know where their whereabouts are, and they don't have access to legal aid. Now, this is related to one of the things I want to talk about at the end of this video regarding Itamar Ben-Gvir and a couple of statements that he made that hinted that Israel will be or might be submitting to the conditions of Hamas, similar to what they've done in the initial temporary ceasefire deal, where they let aid go through all of Gaza, including the northern part, and they let fuel in, and they stopped their attacks against Gaza. But before I get into that, Yediot Ahronot, the Israeli newspaper, they published an article saying that Israel knew 4 years ago about the tunnel in Gaza. This big tunnel that they just revealed, the biggest tunnel that can fit a car, they apparently knew about it 4 years ago. So if you knew about it 4 years ago, where were you? Why did you not attack it? Apparently, a military source told the newspaper that they knew about it and they told the political leadership, but the political leadership refused to do anything. When we're talking about the political leadership, we're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu and his mates. So is it another sting? Is it another backstab to put pressure on Netanyahu because he has different objectives to the war than the rest of the war cabinet? Many people are saying that they want him out. Obviously, the Israeli population has been constantly protesting against him. He was blamed that he led Israel to the 7th of October and he didn't take any responsibility, whereas all other Israeli leadership took responsibility, especially those who were concerned with the security and the army. So are they putting more pressure on him? Because if you're talking about a tunnel of such a scale, why would you let them go ahead with it? Apparently, this source told Yediot Ahronot that Hamas has dozens more tunnels this size in Gaza. Well, if you know them and you're also targeting the Hamas tunnels now, what are you doing with them? Why are you letting them remain there? So this could be all complete lies. We're used to them lying. But the fact that they're saying that could hint that they are trying to put even more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to back down from his objectives of the war. They previously stated that the political leadership told them, no, we don't want to attack Hamas now. That's before the 7th of October. We want a long-term hudna with them. We want a long-term ceasefire. They're not interested in attacking us now. And clearly they've allowed aid and they've allowed a lot of money to go into Gaza previously, hoping that Hamas wouldn't be doing anything. And obviously Israel was too busy in the internal division regarding the judicial reform, and Netanyahu was facing massive protests against him in the past over 1.5 years. Many people, including in the army, were resisting him and the reforms he wanted to pass through to save himself. Primarily, you're talking about military leaders as well. One of the biggest movements in the protests against the judicial reform is a movement formed of Israeli soldiers. Many IDF pilots previously resisted to serve. So you've had a massive talk about refusing to serve in the army, which is considered a big taboo in Israel. You can't be talking about refusing to serve in the army when you're in Israel, because there's conscription and everyone must serve in the army. So these people who were resisting Netanyahu and protesting against him and against the judicial reform, many of them were people from the military, people from the security services in Israel. And that's why many people say Netanyahu led to this disaster, because they felt like Hamas knew that there's a big division, a big disencouragement to go to the army, a big split. They had lots of problems, and they decided to take that timing and attack Israel. Clearly, this proved to be a success, because indeed Israel is still in turmoil internally, even with the war cabinet. Which leads me to the final thing that I wanted to talk about. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the Minister of Internal Security in Israel and one of the most radical figures in the Israeli government, he basically said that we need to dissolve the war cabinet now. Now, in the beginning of the war cabinet was set up on the basis that this guy will not be in the war cabinet. So Benny Gantz said, I'm not getting into the war cabinet when Itamar Ben-Gvir is there. He initially resisted this and said, no, I have to be in, but then he later said, no, okay, that's fine. But now he's saying we need to dissolve the war cabinet now, so he's increasing the tone. He said we need to go back to a wider cabinet, and he also said something which is very, very important that we need to pay close attention to. He said, we won't be part of any government that submits to Hamas conditions. So this hints that there's clearly talks about Israel potentially submitting to the Hamas conditions. The deadline of the beginning of January 2024 is very near. Many people said after the temporary ceasefire ended, America is giving Israel 3 to 4 weeks, maximum up until the new year, worst case scenario, mid to end of January. And they need to stop the war, reach a complete ceasefire and a prisoner swap with the Palestinians, because there's too much pressure on America in the Gulf states in the Middle East. And they're facing backlash from the Houthis, obviously, in Yemen. They're facing backlash from Iraqi movements. Hezbollah is obviously very active. And these movements haven't shown their full force yet. So we're talking about a much bigger threat that can come if Israel persists. Because who knows when the decision can be made with the other movements outside of Gaza to say, that's it, we're going on a full-scale attack on Israel. It can happen any day. And as long as the war on Gaza continues, the more that scenario becomes more realistic and more implementable. So while Netanyahu is playing with fire, other people, other sides from within the Israeli government are trying to tone it down. But some people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, they are giving him a backwind, and he's playing on the far extreme Israeli right, even though most of the Israeli political scene is completely extreme. but he's playing on that side to continue the war and even expand it for the sake of his own career. And remember, Benjamin Netanyahu used to always sell himself as Mr. Security. In Hebrew, he used to have campaigns in the late 2000s calling himself Mar Bitachon, Mr. Security. And the fact that he's leading Israel to such shambles just proves that he's the complete opposite. I mean, in one of his campaigns in the early 2000s, one of his slogans, his party slogans, was Chazak mul ha-Khamas, strong against the Hamas. But the only thing that we're seeing today is that Khamas is making Palestinian Khummus out of Netanyahu and the Israeli army in Gaza. I hope I added some beneficial information for you, and I'll hopefully see you soon in the next video. Take care.